Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading video for Friday, July 23rd, 2021. I feel like a bit of a failure this week in reading. I didn't get through all the books that I was hoping to, but I also did do a fair amount of reading, especially of short stories, which is kind of a focus of mine in July. I'll link down below because on Tuesday I spent much of my free time reading 7 stories from the Best American Short Stories of the Century, edited by John Updike. They were all written in the 60s, FYI. And speaking of short stories, I continue to trundle along in this collection. This week I'm reading Travelogue, which was written by Dorothy Parker, since this is her complete short stories collection. It was written in 1926. It follows a similar pattern for Parker and some of her recent stories, where we are centered very closely on a conversation between two people, and the woman in general seems to not really be understanding what's going on. In this case, it's about a woman who comes up to a man who's recently returned from the Middle East, from what was then Arabia. And ostensibly she's going up to ask him what was it like. But every time he starts to answer, she butts in with all of her preconceived notions. And he tries to sort of, respond to that and to, give actual, intel of his experiences, especially of living with Arabs and of the Muslim religion, and she just keeps on butting in with thoughts about her and her husband and, how they perceive things from their, unenlightened point of view. This was written in the 20s, so it's definitely unenlightened, although it could have been much worse, I think. But mostly it's, I think, again, a comedy of errors about, a woman who thinks she knows what she's doing in a conversation, and she really doesn't. Next, I read The Lying Life of Adults by Elena Ferrante for my page 112 tag this month, and because I'm a Ferrante fan, so I definitely wanted to get to this. But I do think this is my least favorite, definitely, of all of her books that I've read. I've gone back and forth a little bit. I do find a few things compelling. The more subtle aspects of this novel I find compelling, the rest of it not so much. It's a novel that follows the character Giovanna, who is the daughter of intellectuals, and she has an aunt who lives nearby. They're all in Naples, who is less educated, and she's had a huge falling out with Giovanna's father. They're siblings, Vittoria, the aunt, and Giovanna's father. And as Giovanna grows older herself, her father notes, changes in her personality and compares them to his sister, in a petty manner. So Giovanna decides to meet this aunt who she'd been completely estranged from, and it just starts her into this spiral of trying to understand what adults lie about. There's just all of these dramatic schisms between Vittoria and her brother Andrea. There's a lot of sexual drama with all of the adults involved in all sorts of affairs that just, ratchet up the drama amongst all of them. And Giovanna's kind of trying to understand what it really is to be an adult when, they're not as perfect as she thought they were. But I don't think that comes across all that well. I don't know, I feel like this was meant to be an issues novel, something with a big statement, and it didn't really come together. It felt like, a melodrama, and it was very passive, and I feel like, Ferrante's done 2 types of stories. I think the Neapolitan Quartet is very much an issues drama. There's a lot of important and interesting themes, and, socioeconomic and political, and, to do with relationships and patriarchy that she could parse out of that quartet. But, she put in the time to create a really rich world that's far beyond the miasma of a couple of characters, which is what this one is really about. And then Ferrante's also done, I think, a couple of slice of life stories in her standalones, which just worked much better than this, maybe because she's much better, I think, at writing adult characters as POVs. With the exception perhaps of the Neapolitan Quartet, but again, there's just a lot more in that story. And I just felt like whatever messages that she was trying to convey just got lost by all of the melodrama. And, she has the crass, middle-aged character in Vittoria, but since we weren't in her head, she was a disappointment to me. I mean, she was just, this bitter, self-involved woman who made everyone around her miserable. And like, why? Why does it have to be that way? I feel like Victoria got off really easy. Like she, all of her problems were of her own making, but she still was able to sort of call the shots with everybody. And other people made mistakes and had sexual, betrayals, and they suffered more for it, or at least had more, flawed lives because of it. I mean, the things that interested me that were a little less, hit you over the head were the idea, not so much of the lying, but this self-loathing that Giovanna felt for herself, that I think a lot of teenage girls often feel for themselves. And then also with regards to sexuality, there's sort of this overt, projected story about her relationship with men and how she gravitates toward, violence and dehumanization. But then she's also really close and even engaging in, some heavy petting with her female friends that's a lot more subtly explored. And I thought that's more interesting to me than the ridiculous stuff with the guys. So I don't know. This is definitely the weakest one for me of the Ferrante novels. Next, I've read one chapter in this collection of Abraham Joshua Heschel's Essential Writings. I held up this book in a recent book haul, recent-ish anyway, because I was in a study group with someone in the DC area, and we were doing an online class on Heschel, but we kind of found it to be a little lacking, and we wanted to, pick up a book of his on our own and read it and talk about it, I guess. Although it's funny enough, this is his daughter Susannah Heschel compiling some of his works, and I thought they might be like full essays, but instead they're snippets from essays again, similar to the class, except at least there's a little more meat on the bones, and we also get to think up our own thoughts and opinions rather than be sort of fed them by the class, the talking points that the class provided. So anyway, it was interesting. We met the other night at, a local DC restaurant place, a restaurant chain, and talked about chapter 1 a little bit. I underlined and took some notes, figured I'd try to go all out for this. And I think we'll be meeting again in a couple of weeks to continue. Some things that stood out to me in the snippets of Heschel's writing is his focus on embarrassment as a tool, a really worthy tool of humanity, that we have to feel embarrassed by the injustices of the world around us. And for him, a lot of it had to do with race relations in the U.S., like, the oppression of black people, and which in his lifetime, Jim Crow was still a thing, and civil rights was not official. He's famous for marching with Dr. Martin Luther King, and he also stood against the Vietnam War. So those were his calls to activism, and at the time, it made him very controversial when American rabbis didn't do calls for activism, but for him, faith is a jumping off point to action, like that's what makes faith real. So I liked his writings on embarrassment as, sort of a core that we should be thinking about what's wrong and trying to make things right again. And now I'm reading Temporary by Hilary Leitcher for another book club, or a more official book club, really, than the last one. Well, it's with the local JCC's book club, and we're supposed to be meeting in person this month, although I still don't know where. I guess I should email the organizer. But anyway, this is a very short little novel about being a temp employee, and it's satirical about what that means, and what I should have looked into more is to realize how ingrained in magical realism this is. Like, a lot of the action is the narrator taking a temp job on a pirate ship, and also she has a talisman around her neck which contains the ashes of the chairman of the board, and she's like living life for this, archetypal figure. And yeah, magical realism is a tough sell for me. I feel like there's other ways that we could be satirical about the nature of work, and of temp work in particular, without having to go on a pirate ship and try to like glean out what exactly it means about what we're saying about, I don't know, venture capitalism or whatever. I don't know. I'm wondering what the rest of the book club will think. Although, since COVID, I feel like the membership has it changes a lot, so who knows, I might not know the people involved, and obviously some of us voted for this book, although I think I did too, without doing proper research, I suppose. So I don't know, but in the past, members that I remember being like the stalwart members of the past, I don't think they'd be quite as into this sort of magical realism style. I really am finding I'm becoming like a purist when it comes to genre lately. Like, I love literary fiction and I love science fiction and fantasy, but I want them to stay in their own lanes, usually anyway. But I still have a lot more of this novel to go, so I'm going to try to keep an open mind and get some stuff out of this, so we'll see. And from there, there's only the question of where I go next in my reading. I still have not picked up About the Night by Anat Talshir, although I'd kind of hoped I'd be through with this book by now. And now I'm thinking that I'll probably go ahead and push it another month into August, which I guess technically is appropriate since it is a book in translation and it's Women in Translation Month in August. So what do you know? Because speaking of real sci-fi, I really want my next pick to be The Galaxy and the Ground Within by Becky Chambers, which has been one of my anticipated releases of the year, and I've had on my shelf for a few months already, and it's time to get to this. This is the final book in her Wayfarer series, which is about human and alien contact in a galactic commons galaxy. It's what they call hope punk. I actually listened in on an author interview with Chambers last week, and it was a hope punk, interview. I'm really excited for this one. It actually, in this particular novel, I don't think we'll be following any human characters around at all. They'll all be aliens, although I think they will be sort of humanized in terms of their personalities. But that works for me. That works for me. This is the type of world where, it's all about empathy and finding similarities between us, so I'm all for it. So that about covers it for me now. Another reason I want to get to The Galaxy and the Ground Within very soon is because I am hoping to make a video on Becky Chambers' works now that this is the end of her Wayfarer series. I am also waiting for my copy of her new novella, A Song for the Wild-Built, to come in the mail. It hasn't, I think, been officially shipped yet, although I got an email of a confirmation number or something, as you do. But I would very much like to read both of those books, and then I will have read everything that Becky Chambers has published, and I'm hoping to make a video then about her works. Chances are I really won't be finishing all of these books until August, so that video would probably be going up in August. And in the meantime, my next video should then be my July book haul, once I get, the Becky Chambers novella in the mail. So we'll see when that comes around. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.